All right, so the TWAB is out. I'm going to do a breakdown of what I find interesting. I'm not going to go through the whole entire TWAB, read it word for word. You can do that on your own. I'll leave a link to it in the description box down below. It's a very long TWAB, and it looks like, or at least sounds like, a lot of it is sandbox changes, which I'm interested in, but some of it's PvP. And if you've been around this channel long enough, I've made it clear that I just don't care about PvP that much. So I'm just going to scroll down. There might be a lot of jumping, there might not. I haven't read it yet in its entirety. I've just been told what's been in it so far that a lot of people have been talking about, and I'm just going to find things that I'm interested in, talk about it, and yeah, so let's get to it. Starting off with Chris Proctor. His main goals will be to introduce levers to tune how players build for airborne gunplay, allow players to mitigate for flinch, reduce the number of one-hit kills in PvP, address common feedbacks on weapons across all game modes. All right, like I said, I'm not like reading it word for word, so I'm just gonna read like what I find interesting. Glaive of Rave. Notice that several aspects of how glaives interact with weapon and armor perks don't match player expectations and want to take some time to clarify the intent. The changes introduced in season 17 and the logic we'll use for future changes. Glaive melee is a basic melee attack, not a weapon attack. Doesn't consume ammo and deals kinetic damage, so it's more like a unpowered punch than a sword swing. Following buffs to weapon damage to apply to glaive melees would be too powerful or something without a ammo limitation. Particularly in PvP, there were even a small damage buff would allow for incredibly fast 2-hit kills. Also, in general, we prefer to increase glaive melee damage directly as we're doing in fact, instead of effectively making weapon damage perks mandatory on glaives. Glaives already have a long lunge distance, and increasing this at all results in unreliable behavior over the network. So no melee lunge distance buff apply to or glaive melees. Our intent is glaive melees should activate perks that trigger off base melee damage or kills. For example, ammo refill from Grave Robber, weapon damage buff ×5 stacks on Swashbuckler, ammo refill from Sealed Arm Car Grass. Glaive melees should not activate perks that trigger off powered melee damage or kills, or require expending class melee energy such as Combination Blow or Assassin's Cowl. Glaive melees should benefit from melee damage buffs such as Winter's Gal or Wormgod's Caress. Glaive melees should not benefit from weapon damage buffs such as Rampage, Kill Clip, Swashbuckler. Glaive projectiles should benefit from weapon damage buffs. With that expectation set, there's some intricate inconsistencies with how these are implemented in game, some of which we've already fixed, some which we'll look at in the future. Once we have these guidelines consistently implemented in the game, we may look at specific cases where this doesn't match player expectation and do some custom updating descriptions where needed for class clarification. Our primary goal is that players should be able to predict how a glaive interaction will work. Here's what we changed during season 16, largely bug fixes with some quality of life changes. Glaive projectile hits to reach maximum energy decrease from 6 to 4. Glaive melee can now be interrupted by Hunter Dodge. Grave Robber perk now pulls from reserves on glaives instead of generating ammo. Glaives no longer get stuck in clang recovery when using a melee attack on each other. Sealed Arm Car Grass no longer reloads glaives upon projectile hits, but does on melee hits as expected. Glaive melees can no longer stun lock high health combatants. Glaive melee kills are now tracked in match history for bounties and so forth. Let's see, here's what's changing in season 17. We're pushing glaives deeper into their roles of hard-hitting melee damage and near complete protection from when shielded, as well as increasing projectile speed to make them more reliable at range. Note: the glaive shield grants 97.5% damage resistance in PvE, and 75 in PvP. Increase melee damage versus PvE enemies except for bosses and vehicles by 25%. Reduce energy drain speed while shielded by 30%. Increase projectile speed dependent on the range stat. At 0, increase from 30 to 60. At 100, increase from 80 to 100. Exotic glaives have all been buffed. In addition to the global glaive changes, which make it easier to build energy projectile speed, making landing shots easier, and energy granted per projectile hit. Titan Glaive Edge of Action. Players now gain a void overshield while inside the bubble. Helm of Saint 14 now applies to this bubble as it does for Ward of Dawn. Warlock Glaive Edge of Intent, increased speed and acceleration of the healing turret projectiles. Hunter Glaive Edge of Concurrence, tripled the damage of the wave detonation, increased the number of enemies it can chain from 4 to 8. To be honest, I don't care about glaives right now in the game. Maybe next season with the changes and slight buff that they're getting, they'll get an artifact mod that will make them more appealing. But honestly, it's not necessarily one of the most exciting new weapon they've introduced to the game. We'll just have to wait and see. So far the changes sound good. We'll just have to see if they're good. Maybe somebody will do some testing and see how crazy they can get next season. I won't be one of them, but I guess keep your eyes out in the YouTube space and see what people come up with. All right, so this next part is something I've been looking for a decent long time, considering that the original reason Flinch was implemented in the game was because of PvP, and it's had a noticeable effect on PvE, especially when trying to snipe enemies. So I'm going to read off what he has to say about the changes that are coming for Flinch resistance, and yeah, I'll give you my thoughts at the end. Global changes. Flinch. Aim deflection on receiving damage, typically called flinch, is a common pain point, particularly on primary ammo weapons. We've rebuilt the stability weapon stat to grant flinch resistance in addition to its other effects, with a maximum flinch resistance of between 10% to 25% depending on the weapon archetype. With this change, players can build for flinch resistance more easily on weapons that feel flinch more than others, and less so on special weapons, which we don't want to be easier to use when under fire. From internal playtests, you may not feel the difference when using just one source of flinch resistance, but when stacking 2 or more sources, the benefit is strong. Note, the higher zoom weapons are more affected by flinch, which we took into account when turning these numbers. Here's a breakdown for flinch resistance with 100 stability: 25% auto rifle, submachine, and bow, 20% pulse, scout, sidearm, machine gun, 15% hand cannon, trace rifle, 10% fusion rifle, shotgun, sniper, grenade launcher, both breach and drum, linear fusion rifles, both special and heavy, rocket launcher. Note that the stability stat of below 20 will typically have a small flinch resistance penalty, but only around 5 weapons have stability stat in that range. Mentioned here because it's a related change, the resilient character stat now grants flinch resistance of 0% at 0, 10 at 100%. Example, note that sources of flinch resistance stack multiplicatively. 100 stat stability Suros pulse rifle, Suros synergy active, 10 resilience, no distractions, and 2 unflinching pulse rifle armor, while buffed by rally barricade, 90% flinch resilience. A 70 stability stat hand cannon, 5 resilience, 1 unflinching hand cannon armor mod, 39% flinch resilience. Now, it seems a little bit more complicated than it needed to be for getting flinch resilience, but I will take it over nothing. Unfortunately, with these changes, it seems like hunters may be screwed a little bit, especially those of you who are PvP heads, since you normally ignore resilience stat. I would say at least 5 resilience. Shouldn't be too hard to pull off as a hunter. You may have to give up a little bit of grenade energy or whatever have you, but if you want that flinch resilience, you know, get that. Warlocks aren't effective at as much because, you know, you can just get rid of some of that intellect. Intellect isn't as necessary as it used to be. You can definitely still build into recovery and a little bit of resilience, and mobility just doesn't do anything for warlocks at all, so it should be easy to pull off there. Titans get the most benefit of this because I don't really see too many Titans that undervalue the resilience stat. Most Titans these days, if they know what they're doing, would be between like 70 and 90 resilience. You don't need really to be 100 resilience on Titan because, you know, the difference between 90 and 100 is just very insignificant, especially if you use things like the stasis mod on your class item that gives you your class item back, like 10% of your class item back for using your class item. So we will see how this affects the PvP sphere, which I necessarily won't be keeping track of too much. I only play PvP to get rid of my bounties and my bright dust. But for PvE, I will be looking forward to this because as a Titan, I mean, resilience is just my bread and butter regardless. So anything that helps, and I do value the stability stat on pretty much every single weapon. There aren't too many weapons that actually just ignore outright the stability stat. So for me, this is a good change because both these stats are stats that I pay attention to. Skipping ahead to playlist weapons. The latest playlist weapons dropped from Gambit, Crucible, and Strike activity completions. Older weapons are available from vendor rank packages or can be focused. These weapons are intended to provide interesting drops even for players who spend a lot of time in an activity. And while we want to keep the large perk pool to address that goal, we want to provide a way to reduce the duration of the chase for players who want a specific weapon. Also, since older playlist weapons are still available as vendor rank up rewards, we want them to feel more relevant in a post-origin trait world. So I believe the changes are right here. Playlist weapons now have a chance to roll with extra traits in one or both columns, increasing with number of rank resets that vendor during a given season. Note, reputation resets each season, so you'll need to play these activities each season to unlock the potential for extra perks. All playlist weapons from Beyond Light and later will drop with the appropriate origin trait. So I believe now that means you can get like a servant leader with the Gambit origin trait, maybe. That would be great. Same thing with some of the actually a lot of the Vanguard weapons are pretty good. It's just trying to get a decent roll of them are just damn near impossible. Also, probably getting a weapon such as the sniper from Crucible. For some reason the name escapes me, with like a Crucible origin trait, you know, out of a fight for like a couple of seconds, and then you'll be able to reload that faster. Now the playlist specific weapons will have more reason for you to chase them because they will be getting the origin trait. Normally I would have just glossed over this point, but this is too big of a change for even me to ignore. So let's just get right into this part. One hit kills and special ammo. There are several damage buffs external to weapons that allow weapons to one hit kill without much investment, such as aggressive sniper rifles with high impact reserves, Ariana's Vow, or La Monarch. Specifically, when combined with an external 20% damage buff. As an example, Empowering Rift can give many sniper rifles one-hit body shot capabilities in Crucible. Most of these use the same buff under the hood, so we've adjusted them all at once. With these changes, it's going to be much rarer to get an easy one-hit kill with a weapon that wouldn't typically allow it. Reduce the damage bonus for Empowering Rift High Energy Fire and Inertia Override from 20% to 15% against players. No effect in PvE. In addition, we want special ammo to be less plentiful, making it more difficult to chain special weapon kills. Disabled ammo scavenger armor mod in PvP. No matter how much ammo a player was carrying on death, if you pick up a special weapon brick, You can only get 1 ammo for a shotgun, sniper rifle, or 1 kill's worth ammo for a weapon that require more than 1 shot to kill, e.g. Forerunner, trace rifles. Retune several special weapon archetypes and exotic weapons, see below, with the general goal of reducing the effectiveness and uptime of special weapons. This is a unexpected change for what's coming next season. I know they said there was going to be very PvP focused, but I didn't think they would go so far as to remove the effectiveness of scavenger mods outright in PvE. Now this does give more credence to things like, you know, armor mods that like give you your health back for picking up orbs of light. You can build a little bit more into things like creating more orbs of light when it comes down to PvP upon your primary weapon kills and getting your abilities back, because unfortunately it just doesn't feel like a targeting mod is going to make that much of a difference for special weapons if you're only going to be able to get like 1 brick back per kill. This is going to be an interesting change. I don't think this will make me want to play more PvP next season, but this is definitely something that is worth looking into in terms of how it makes PvP feel next season. I feel like there's still going to be more aping because people are just going to be rushing, trying to get that kill with whatever they have spawned in and try and still chain, but they just won't be able to go on a complete rampage for the entire match. We got some changes coming to Fusion Rifle next season. When we rebuilt Fusion Rifles in season 15, we wanted to differentiate the subfamilies dramatically from each other, which worked. Now that we've seen them in action for a couple of seasons, we're pulling back from the extremes a little. With these changes, fusion rifle subfamilies are still very different from each other, but high impacts are stronger and rapid fires and precision should be a little less dominant. High impact reduce unmodified high impact charge time from 1000 to 0.960s. Increase damage per burst by 10. Precision increase unmodified charge time from 0.74 to 0.780s. Rapid fire increase unmodified charge time from 0.460 to 0.500. Decrease damage per burst by 20. New charge time and damage per burst for all fusion rifle subfamilies. High impact 330 damage. Precision 280 damage, adaptive 270 damage, rapid fire 245. Some changes coming to trace rifles that are not of the divinity because they are not popular in hard content as we want them to be. We particularly want damage type reworks of the oldest 3 trace rifles to have a chance to shine this season. Probably won't be seeing more trace rifles in PvE. I'm going to be honest, they're just not that good, and they're also more affected by disabling scavenger mods than other special weapons. With this change, there are better use of special ammo against non-red bar targets. Increased damage against non-red bar combatants by 20%. Maybe golden tricorn will make this worthy of use. Increased ammo pickup per special ammo brick from 18 to 30. I'm gonna be honest with you, outside of divinity, trace rifles just probably will not be the move. Jumping to heavy weapons, machine guns still aren't where we want them to be in PvE. I've been saying this for the longest, that even with the last buff, it is not good enough. And also with the issue of Xenophage being nerfed for literally no reason without finding out whether or not it was going to be good beforehand. Let's see what Bungie has to say about machine guns. So we're giving them an additional buff, but less so against bosses where their extremely long range and deep ammo reserves would make them strong in too many rolls. With this change, they'll shred most enemies without stepping on top tier boss damage options. Increase damage by 40% against PvE enemies, 20% versus bosses. Xenophage and Grand Overture receive this buff, except for the bonus versus bosses. I honestly cannot wait to see how much this affects PvE. I am a big proponent of LMGs in general. I just haven't had a good reason to use one. You know, there are plenty of special weapons that do really good boss damage, so to be able to have a really good LMG for just straight up ad clear whenever you're full on ammo would just be really fine with me. We'll just see how much it affects, especially when it comes down to like melting champions. I was really hoping to see a change to Xeno nerf. I mean, it's getting an overall buff, but the RPM nerf was really unnecessary. But I do know that there are some specific exotic changes down below, so we will see whether or not that is included in that. Moving on, rocket launcher subfamilies weren't differentiated enough by the previous change, so we've made the difference more extreme. With this change, we expect there to be more marked trade-off for the intrinsic tracking on precisions and a greater benefit for other subfamilies specified relative to the baseline, i.e. high impact rocket launchers. Precision -10% damage both on impact and detonation. High impact, no change. The subfamily has the highest blast radius. Adaptive and aggressive +10 to damage. Now granted, this is not really, I get the reason why they're making this change, but adaptive and aggressive can roll with tracking, which you would think would be a waste on a slot, but really isn't. Like, I have 2 different adept hotheads and I run tracking on both of them instead of the other perk, which would be demolitionist. Now, being able to throw a grenade and get a rocket loaded into the chamber a lot faster would be the strat. That's only if you had a target that isn't very mobile, and unfortunately most bosses these days tend to come in the I will not stand in one spot and I will come to kick you in the face variety. Those of you who know the reference understand. And also with bosses like the Lightblade, who really doesn't like standing in one place, and if you've had to go through the horror of doing the GM, which honestly it isn't that hard, I will show you my strat for getting through it for those of you who are interested. I just gotta download a video and edit, yada yada. Anyway, tracking seems to be like the best perk for pretty much any rocket, so just nerfing the precision by 10%, it's not that big of a deal because I mean I run lasting impression on most of my tracking rockets, and the other rockets I just don't really use because I just kind of only use one right now. I have a whole bunch of rockets. If I were to show you my dim, I just don't use them because I have the ones I use. I tend to be like very stuck in my ways when it comes down to what I think works. But anyway, interesting change. We'll see how it affects the game. All exotics that shipped before the Forsaken release now have their kill trackers visible by default, and we'll just read over the exotic changes that I'm interested in, yada yada. If you want to see it yourself, you already know what to do. Eyes of Tomorrow as a raid exotic ought to be better against tough PvE enemies. With this change, it's a solid option in this role, particularly with the adaptive ordnance perk active. Increased damage versus bosses and champions by 30%. This is something that Eyes of Tomorrow has needed for a long time. I don't know why they nerfed it so hard when, especially now that we have Gjallarhorn in the game, Gjallarhorn needs some competition. Will this be enough to override Gjallarhorn's dominance? Probably not, because Gjallarhorn has the ability to buff other rockets, but I can see myself using Eyes of Tomorrow's in a solar singe or burn nightfall, so we shall see how strong this becomes. Leviathan's breath always felt like it should absolutely wreck champions, and using its first shot to stun and unstoppable without it doing much damage felt bad. Arch tempos from its catalyst is significant on paper, but in practice that draw speed buff isn't as noticeable as we'd like. Overall, we hope these changes make it feel a bit better against all types of champions and other tough enemies in hard content. Archer's tempo perk from the catalyst now has increased effect just on this weapon. The standard draw time scaler for Archer's tempo is 0.75, should now be that's a lot of numbers, on Leviathan's breath. At a small delay before detonation on champions, mini bosses, and bosses. This allows the impact to stun an unstoppable champion and the detonation to deal bonus damage against the stunned champion. Damage seems to be more of an even split between impact and detonation. and increase damage across the board by 50%, or about 50%. Overall damage versus champions is roughly double, even more compared to shooting an unstoppable champion. Ah, finally. Let's hope that the change to Xenophage makes it at least back to where it was before. Our experiment with pushing Xenophage into harder hitting but slower firing didn't pan out, obviously. So we're increasing the rate of fire and adjusting damage back to what it was. Rate of fire from 100 to 120 RPM, yes. Reduce damage per bullet to match the previous, acceptable. Doesn't benefit from season 17 machine gun damage versus bosses, also acceptable because we have divinity. Doing that crit damage with divinity is going to make it a beast, which is probably why it didn't get the damage versus buff, because we all know that people are going to use it with divinity or weakening effect, so obviously that would be a little bit too overkill. But this makes it a better option for Rogue as opposed to having to use a rocket, but I don't think it will outbeat Sleeper. Maybe someone should do some damage testing on that. The Monarch is too oppressive when combined with external damage buffs, but we felt that it could be stronger in PvE. With this change combined with the damage buff above, we've introduced a 60 resilience gate on killing a Guardian in PvP with a crit while in an empowering rift or similar. Reduce precision tick damage versus players by 25%. Change poison damage type. This is PvP. Poison tick damage versus AI by 50%. So overall does better at killing things in PvE. Good. Ooh, Skyburners is getting a change. Let's see what that has to do. Skyburner's ult felt like it didn't have a niche except for airborne memes. So we've made a bunch of changes aiming to improve its ease of use, give it some more utility, and really push it to that airborne role. Increase ADS projectile speed. Wow. It's now hit scan. Cool. Both ADS and hipfire are now 150 RPM. That's also interesting. Hipfire projectile no longer tracks, but arcs similar to a grenade launcher and has a larger detonation size than ADS. Acceptable hipfire detonation also applies to burn. Oh, okay. Adding dot damage. Solar 3.0 synchronization. Yeah, that word. The bonus range from the masterwork has been rolled into the base stat for the weapon. The masterwork now grants bonus reload speed instead. Acceptable. Highest airborne effectiveness stat of any weapon in the game. Arbalest is more dominant than intended in hard PvE content, able to fill an anti-barrier role as well as shield breaking and boss damage. Made a fairly small adjustment here, but may need to look at it again in the future. Reduce damage versus champions by 25%. Will still break barriers in one hit. I'm not a fan of that. I can understand why, because Arbalest just seems like a necessary against champions, but honestly, champion weapons in general just need to be better. That's why Arbalest is so fucking strong, because none of the other champion weapons are just good in general. I mean, I would like to see anti-barrier sniper back again, but what do I know? Anyway, hopefully they don't nerf it anymore. Graviton Lance catalyst didn't help the weapon enough. We wanted to give it a bit of a boost. Change gives it some interesting utility in PvP and E, particularly with a buff to exotic primary weapons in the Witch Queen. Catalyst changed from granting Hidden Hand to granting Vorpal Weapon and Turnabout. Okay. I just really hope that next season that we're getting the full auto thing that we're supposed to be getting for like accessibility instead of having it as a mod, because Graviton Lance is not easy on someone who has carpal tunnel. I will just leave it at that. Coldheart, arc damage type update. Coldheart's exotic trait, more or less being, is a trace rifle. I mean, yeah, it is technically just a trace rifle. No longer fits in the world with legendary trace rifles. The ease of use on sustained damage was also pretty low. Sustained damage creates an ionic trace, and collecting an ionic trace grants energy to all your abilities. Increase grace time before the damage ramp clears from 0.133 seconds to 0.1 second. Okay, I still don't see it being more useful than Divinity, but we'll see. Prometheus Lens, solar damage type update. And generally, this needed some tweaks to be viable. Sustained damage applies a more powerful burn to targets. See how that works? This is another thing I'll probably need some testing. Maybe people can do an all trace rifle like GM, see how well they stack up together. Wavesplitter void damage type update. Power cycling mechanic was interesting, but ultimately hard to capitalize on. Power no longer cycles randomly. Damage gel output is the same as the old middle tier. Picking up an orb of power grants 10 seconds of maximum power that caps at 20 seconds from 5 and 10. Now suppresses targets while granted this mode by picking up an orb. Okay. We have a weapon that now specializes in suppressing targets. I mean, there's that one exotic from the new raid, which I haven't had a chance to touch. What? I feel like Wavesplitter would be better for this. Near-term abilities tuning. With weapons talk out of the way, let's shift back to some near-term conversations and happenings in Destiny 2. While in the near term, we do have some tuning for abilities and exotic armors in Crucible as well. Next Tuesday, April 26th, Destiny 2 hotfix 4.0.1.1 will become available with the following changes. Axion Bolt base cooldown increased from 91 seconds to 152 seconds. That's understandable. And Barricade base cooldown when the Bastion Void aspect is equipped is now 82 seconds, up from 53 seconds. Also understandable. Matches recharge rate of Warlock Rift. The issue is that this affects PvE. It'd be different if it said just in PvP, but this also affects PvE, and I'm not a fan of that, which is a big meh for me. Bulwark now provides 60% less grenade energy regeneration in PvP game modes. That is acceptable. Whisper of Change now provides 15% damage resistant against players when near a stasis crystal, down from 25%. This is also understandable. Unchanged in PvE. Renewal Grass, while equipped, Renewal Grass increases the base cooldown of the Dust-Filled Grenade from 62 to 152. Understandable. Outgoing damage penalty applied to player victim in the Renewal Grass Dustful Grenade reduced from 50 to 20%. Also understandable. Damage unchanged versus PvE target. Stay tuned for the full patch notes article planned for release alongside the hotfix. Skipping forward all the way to the end, I know there's some stuff in between here and now and the end, but 7 is a magic number. Depending on when you're reading this, Charles is returning tomorrow after a short hiatus. It'll be another labs weekend featuring capture zones. Last time Charles was available, a pesky little bug had slipped in, granting a few additional adept rewards to players on confidence passages. Well, good news everyone, that was sort of a feature. While we discussed this in the patch notes on Tuesday, I still wanted to take a moment to highlight this change. Over the last few seasons, we've seen some great feedback and data on Charles rewards. One piece of feedback specifically speaks to the flawless pool that's enabled each Sunday. While this creates a more welcoming environment for those of differing skill levels in the non-flawless pool, we have heard feedback from those in the flawless pool that things feel a bit more competitive without much of a change to rewards output. Moving forward, any player in the flawless pool who is at the 7th win of a given passage will have chances for adept weapons to drop at post-match. Whether you still have flawless passage or ended up with a couple of losses under your belt, you'll continue to have chances for post-matches adept drops once you've reached 7 total wins. We'd been working on this change for a bit, but a small issue led us to backing out the change just before season 16 began. Through that process, an alternative bug was introduced on confidence passages, giving a slight preview of changes to come. Pardon our dust. In any case, we're looking forward to watching the feedback roll in this weekend. I've heard this reward might be desirable for those who enjoy longer views on the battlefield. I never did snag a good roll on Redacted, so I'll be spending time in there this weekend. Maybe I'll see you there. This 9K, our editor roundup, behemoth of a blog article in the bag. I'm taking a few weeks off to relax and the rain, sun. Never really know during the Seattle spring. Whatever the weather, it would be nice to spend some time focusing on physical and mental health. There's not a single doubt in my mind that I'll play some Destiny, especially with some fun events on the way. I might just hop in a car and start driving without a specific destination in mind. In this economy? Alright, buddy. Maybe I'll end up on a mountain, or maybe I'll take a walk on the beach. Who knows? Who knows where the road will take me? Now that we have more hands on the community team, we each have a few more opportunities to take a breather. I hope you're able to find some time this year for the same. Anybody going to GCX? Anybody? Be kind to yourselves, to each other, and I'll see you again. Cheers. DMGO4. And that's pretty much it. This TWAB was very lengthy, but you know, had some really interesting tidbits. A lot of it was PvP focused, so I did end up skipping a lot of it. There's a change coming to Gambit, which we'll see how that rolls out. Last bit about Trials has my interest. Maybe I'll care to go flawless early in the week, see what I get. If I don't get anything decent, maybe I'll enter the flawless pool and see what I get. You know, maybe I'll get a couple of wins and then maybe I'll get some decent loot out of it. If it is the sniper, which I think it is, probably not this week, but you never know. Maybe now I have a better chance at getting an adept. Reads regret. Maybe I'll go through the pain and suffering of trying to get a decent one that is adept. Probably not after everything I've gone through, but you never know. But this has been my coverage of the TWAB. Let me know what your thoughts are on this week's TWAB down below in the comment section, and I'll see you in the next video. My name has been Cell Games. Thank you for making it through this video. If you have, don't forget to hit the like button if you found this video enjoyable, maybe you like my voice, and hit that notification bell so you can be notified after subscribing. And don't forget to hit all notifications so you'll be notified whenever I upload a new Destiny 2 video or anything else that may hit my fancy. Anyway, have a good weekend. Peace out.